Hello and welcome. In the Bible, the desert is an important place, an important time. The desert is a time when things that are familiar to people are stripped away. Now, in the Bible, the desert can be a time to be tempted and to fall away from God, or the desert can be a time and place to grow closer to God. For example, in the first reading today, taken from the book of Numbers, the people of Israel are tempted and they fall away from God. Elsewhere in the Bible, however, the desert can be a place of growth. For example, the prophet Elijah is strengthened in the desert. Jesus Christ, before he begins his public ministry, spends time in the desert, preparing for that. This time of the pandemic is certainly a time in the desert. It's a time when so much that is familiar to us, that's normal to us, has been taken away. We cannot gather with our families. Perhaps we cannot go to work. We cannot go out. We're separated from our friends. We're even separated in some very important ways from our parish and church community. How can we use this time in the desert as a time of growth? Perhaps during this time, God is asking us to rediscover important truths and practices that we perhaps have not paid as close attention to rediscover these truths and practices and to start living them so that when we are done with this pandemic, when this wilderness experience is over, we can continue living these practices and truths. Perhaps one truth and practice that God is wanting us to be reminded of is that of the domestic church. Now, the Second Vatican Council and the Catechism of the Catholic Church reminds us that each family is a domestic church. Each family is a place where God is worshiped, where the faith is passed down, where charity is practiced. Now, it's true that at this time we are cut off from the wider church, our parish community. We cannot go to Mass, receive the sacraments as we did before. And it's important that we can keep in touch with this wider parish community in some very interesting and creative ways today. For example, by live streaming the Mass. This is a very important practice. But also during this time, we can use this time in the wilderness to rediscover the idea of the domestic church, that each family in itself is a church, that they can have their own worship, their own liturgy. And there's so many different beautiful customs and traditions that families over time in different places have practiced, different ways that they've worshiped God, had liturgy in their house. For example, families can gather together at certain times, maybe in the morning or the evening, and they can pray a bit of the rosary together or the rosary together. They can read part of scripture, for example, the readings of the day. Families can gather together to offer their prayers and petitions to God. Families can gather together to recognize things that they're grateful to God for. And maybe if children are older, even families can gather together to pray part of the liturgy at the hours together. Some families also in their domestic church have a special sacred place in their house, maybe a prayer corner. And if you don't have something like this, it might be something you want to make. In this prayer corner, this sacred place, it can be a gathering place of prayer in the family, in the domestic church. There can be a candle there that can be lit, a cross, another sacred image. How is God asking us to live during this time in the wilderness? Perhaps he's asking us to rediscover this idea of the domestic church so it's something we can live even when this pandemic is over. And living the domestic church can happen whether you're just a couple, even a single person can develop these different practices. So what practice or practices are you doing as a family, or would you like to do as a family to reignite this idea of the domestic church? Maybe you'd like to leave them in the comment sections below. They might be helpful for other people. I hope you're all doing well, and God bless you.